It was a cold January night in Madison, Indiana. The kind of night where the roads are empty, and the only sounds are the wind cutting through bare trees. Somewhere in the stillness, a young girl was waiting by her front door, her breath fogging up in the winter air. She was 12 years old. Her name was SHANDER. The voices calling her outside weren't unfamiliar. They weren't strangers in dark alleys or masked figures lurking in the shadows. They were teenage girls, girls who laughed in school hallways, passed notes in class, talked about music and boys. But on this night, there was something different about them, something that would turn a so-called prank into one of the most horrific crimes the state had ever seen. They told SHANDER they were there to take her to see a friend. She hesitated, but she was 12, just a child. What reason would she have to fear other kids? She stepped outside. The car door opened. She got in. And in that moment, without knowing it, SHANDER had just sealed her fate. Hours later, her body would be found on a deserted country road, burned beyond recognition. Her killers? 4 teenage girls: Melinda Loveless, Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Tony Lawrence. They didn't just kill her, they toyed with her. They laughed while she begged. They tortured her for hours. And in the end, they set her on fire while she was still alive. What would drive 4 young girls to commit an act so unspeakable that even the most hardened detectives struggled to make sense of it? Was it jealousy? Was it peer pressure? Or was it something far darker? Something that had been waiting beneath the surface all along? This is the story of SHANDER. And once you hear it, you'll never forget it. If you've ever lived in a small town, you know the feeling. The same streets, the same faces. The same corner store where the cashier already knows what brand of soda you're about to grab. The kind of place where Friday night means a high school basketball game, where parents don't check the time because they know their kids will be home when the streetlights flicker on. It was that kind of town, quiet, safe, the kind of place where nothing bad ever really happens, until it does. There were just over 12,000 people living in Madison back then. That's not a big number. That's a place where everyone knows everyone, where parents still left their doors unlocked at night because why wouldn't they? But in the early hours of January 11th, that small town's safety shattered. A crime so brutal, so incomprehensible that it felt like something that belonged in a horror movie, not in the real world, not in Madison, Indiana. And yet it happened. A girl was murdered that night, and not just murdered, tortured, burned, reduced to something unrecognizable. Even the most hardened detectives, people who had spent decades staring at crime scenes, would later admit they had never seen anything like it. And the most chilling part? It wasn't a stranger who did this. It wasn't some faceless monster lurking in the dark. It was 4 teenage girls. This is the story of SHANDER. She was 12 years old, just 12. That age where you're still figuring out what kind of person you want to be, where you still sleep with a nightlight but tell your friends you don't, where one day you feel like a little kid, and the next you're trying on lip gloss in the bathroom mirror, wondering what it feels like to be older. She had a best friend, a favorite song, a family who loved her. She had crushes and giggle-filled sleepovers and a future that should have stretched out ahead of her, filled with awkward middle school dances and high school heartbreaks and inside jokes that make no sense years later. She should have been able to grow up, make mistakes, learn from them, live a life. But she never got the chance. Because on a cold January night, SHANDER made a decision that seemed harmless at the time. She stepped outside her house, and within hours, she was gone. The story of what happened next isn't just about SHANDER. It's about 4 other girls. Girls who had parents, who sat in classrooms, who went to the mall and talked about boys and complained about homework. Girls who should have known better. This wasn't random. It didn't come out of nowhere. This crime was planned. And what they did, what they were capable of, will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature. Stay with me, because what happens next is something no one saw coming. Before that night, before the screams, before the fire, there was a girl. A 12-year-old girl who should have been safe in her bed dreaming about the things 12-year-olds dream about. But she wasn't. And it all started with something as old as time itself: jealousy. Who was Shanda? Shanda Scherer was a bright, energetic girl. The kind of kid who could make friends anywhere, who giggled at inside jokes, who still left notes in her friends' lockers just to make them smile. She had just started middle school, a whole new world of possibilities, friendships, and first crushes. And one of those crushes was Amanda Hevrin. Amanda was older, 15, blonde, confident. They met at school and there was an instant connection. Notes passed between classes, secret hand-holding, a friendship that was turning into something more. But Amanda had a past, and that past had a name. Melinda Lovelace wasn't just Amanda's ex. She was still in love with her. And in Melinda's mind, Shanda wasn't just a new crush, she was a threat. Jealousy is an ugly thing. But this wasn't just jealousy. This was something deeper, something darker. Melinda wasn't just heartbroken, she was obsessed. And when obsession turns into rage, things get dangerous. She warned Amanda to stay away from Shanda. She wrote letters filled with anger, with threats. She told her friends she hated Shanda, that she wanted to hurt her. But no one believed she meant it, because who actually follows through with something like that? Then came the plan to scare Shanda, just to teach her a lesson, just to make sure she knew her place. But it was never just a plan. It was a death sentence. Hope Rippey, 15. The follower. Hope wasn't a leader. She never had been. But when she was with the right people or the wrong people, she was eager to prove herself, to laugh when they laughed, to go along with whatever they said no matter how dangerous it was. Tony Lawrence, 15, the one who was scared, but not enough to stop it. Tony was the closest thing to a conscience in that car. She was scared. She knew what was happening was wrong. But fear is a powerful thing, and on that night it kept her silent. It started with a simple idea, a scare tactic, just to put fear into her, make her back off from Amanda, make her understand that Melinda wasn't someone to mess with. The plan was set: lure Shanda out of her house, take her somewhere dark, frighten her, maybe rough her up a little. But what started as a prank quickly turned into something much, much worse. It was just after midnight on January 11th when the car pulled up to Shanda's house. Melinda wasn't there yet. This part of the plan had to be subtle, quiet. She couldn't risk Shanda suspecting anything. So Hope and Tony, the youngest of the group, took the lead. They knocked on the door, smiled, pretended to be friendly. They told Shanda they were Amanda's friends, that Amanda wanted to see her, that she was waiting for her just outside of town. Shanda hesitated. It was late. Her parents were asleep, but she was 12. And when you're 12, you don't always think about danger the way you should. You think about adventure, about sneaking out for just a little bit, about seeing the person who makes your heart race. So she grabbed a sweater, put on her shoes, and stepped outside. And the second that car door shut behind her, her fate was sealed. They could have let her go. Right then, right there. It could have ended before it even truly began. But it didn't. Instead, they took her somewhere dark, somewhere isolated, a crumbling, abandoned house on the outskirts of town. Locals called it the Witch's Castle, a place wrapped in legends of ghosts and rituals. But that night, it wasn't the ghosts that made it terrifying. It was them. Shanda was scared. She asked to go home. She begged them to take her back. But they didn't listen. Instead, they laughed. They whispered ghost stories, telling her that spirits of the dead still roamed these ruins, that if she cried too much, they'd come for her. And Lori Tackett, the ringleader, the one who took pleasure in fear, leaned in close and whispered, "They're watching us right now." Shanda was only 12. She still believed in ghost stories. But this wasn't a ghost story. This was something worse. Because ghosts don't hurt you. People do. If you think this was the worst of it, if you think this was where they stopped, it gets much, much worse. Shanda was crying now. Not the kind of cry that kids do when they don't get their way. This was different, desperate, gut-wrenching, a sound that sticks in your ears and doesn't leave. She begged them, over and over, "Please let me go. Please take me home. Please, I won't tell anyone." But Melinda Lovelace just smiled. And then in the coldest, most chilling voice she said, "Ain't she cute? I wonder what she'd look like burning." That wasn't a joke. It wasn't an empty threat. It was a promise. But first, they had other plans. Lori kept driving. The road stretched on, empty and dark. The town had fallen asleep hours ago. No one saw them. No one heard them. They drove for miles, deep into the woods, away from houses, away from help, away from anything that could save her. And that's where the real nightmare began. They beat her, first with their fists, then with a rope, then with a knife. She screamed. They told her to shut up. She tried to run. They pulled her back. And then they stabbed her, again, and again, and again. She was bleeding, shivering, slipping in and out of consciousness, but somehow, she was still alive. Her body was giving up, but her mind wasn't. She was still fighting, still hoping. But the girls weren't done, not even close. They thought she was dead, but she wasn't. They threw her in the trunk of the car like she was nothing. A girl who was once laughing with her friends, going to school, living her life, now stuffed in the cold metal darkness of a trunk. But she was still breathing. And from inside that trunk, she made a sound. A small broken sound. The kind that shouldn't have been possible after everything they'd done to her. And the girls? They just turned the radio up to drown her out. They stopped for fast food, sat in the car, ate their meal, laughed. They drove to a field, an empty, quiet field where no one would hear what happened next. They opened the trunk. And somehow, impossibly, Shanda still moved. That's when Lori Tackett grabbed a gas can. Hope Rippey hesitated but didn't stop it. Tony Lawrence looked away but didn't stop it. And Melinda Lovelace, the one who started it all, smiled. They covered her in gasoline, every inch of her battered, broken body. And then they lit the match. The flames rose, the air filled with the smell of burning flesh. The heat cracked the frozen air. And a girl who had once been full of life and laughter took her last breath. And they stood there. And they watched, and they laughed. It was just after sunrise on January 11th, 1992, Jefferson County, Indiana. The air was still, the fields coated in frost. A local man heading out for his morning walk noticed something unusual in a nearby clearing. At first he thought it was a pile of burned trash, but as he got closer he realized something was terribly wrong. The shape, the smell. His stomach turned. He rushed to the nearest house and dialed 911. The call went through at 10:55 a.m. Within minutes, Jefferson County deputies were on their way. But nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to see. When the first officer stepped out of his car, the smell hit him first. The heavy, sickening scent of burnt flesh. And then he saw it. Lying in the field was what was left of a young girl, charred, unrecognizable, her body twisted in unnatural ways. The fire had done its job, covering up almost every piece of evidence, except for one thing. Her hands. They had been clenched into fists so tightly that her fingers hadn't burned all the way through. It was as if, even in death, she had been holding on to something. Even veteran officers, men who had seen violent crimes before, later admitted that this was one of the worst things they had ever witnessed. Who was she? How did she get here? And who could do something like this? They didn't know it yet, but the answers were coming fast. While police were taping off the crime scene and searching for clues, something was happening just 40 miles away in the city of Madison. 4 girls sat inside a McDonald's, laughing, eating breakfast, acting like nothing had happened. But then, Lori Tackett couldn't help herself. She leaned in toward the others and grinned. "Did you all hear that noise she made when we burned her?" she said. "It sounded like a little ghost." Melinda Loveless laughed. Hope Rippey laughed. Even Tony Lawrence, the one who had been the most scared, forced a small smile. What they didn't know? Someone was listening, and someone was about to talk. Less than 12 hours after one of the most brutal murders in Indiana history, the girls had already made their biggest mistake. And that mistake would be their downfall. It didn't take long for the walls to close in. Tony Lawrence was the first to crack. The 15-year-old, terrified and overwhelmed with guilt, went to a friend's house and broke down. Through sobs, she admitted the unthinkable. "Something bad happened. I think someone died." The friend's parents called the police, and just like that, the investigation had its first real lead. One by one, the pieces started falling into place. The names, the roles they played, the lies they told their parents. Within days, all 4 girls, Melinda Loveless, Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Tony Lawrence, were arrested. The details of what they had done to Shander were so horrific that many people, including some members of law enforcement, pushed for the death penalty. But there was one problem. All 4 were minors. The law wouldn't allow it. Instead, they faced the maximum punishment allowed for juveniles charged as adults. Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett received 60 years in prison, the harshest sentences given. Hope Rippey, who participated in the attack but later showed remorse, was given 50 years, reduced to 35 after a plea deal. Tony Lawrence, who was too afraid to stop it but played the smallest role, was sentenced to 20 years, serving only 9 before parole. Justice was served. Or was it? People struggled to understand. These weren't hardened criminals. They weren't gang members, career criminals, or psychopaths. They were teenage girls from Middle America. So how? How did 4 girls, all under 18, commit a crime so horrific it stunned even the most seasoned detectives? The answer starts long before that night. To understand Melinda Loveless, the mastermind, you have to understand where she came from. She was the youngest daughter of a violent, abusive man. Her father, Larry Loveless, was a predator, an alcoholic, and a man who should never have been around children. He beat his wife, he assaulted women, and his daughters. They grew up in a home filled with fear and trauma. Melinda had no stability, no real sense of safety. And when she felt threatened, when she thought Shander was taking away Amanda Hevron, the one person she loved, she responded with the kind of violence her whole life had surrounded her. Lori Tackett, the other ringleader, had a different but equally disturbing background. She had been obsessed with the occult, horror movies, and violence for years. She talked about hurting people. She bragged about wanting to kill. But no one, no teacher, no adult took it seriously until it was too late. Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence, they were followers. Hope was desperate to be liked. Tony was too scared to say no. And when you put 4 broken, unstable kids together in a situation where violence is normalized, the results can be catastrophic. Was this just a perfect storm of broken homes and bad influences, or was something darker at play? Psychologists studying the case have pointed to a combination of factors: childhood trauma, peer pressure, and a disturbing psychological phenomenon known as groupthink. Groupthink is what happens when people in a group stop thinking as individuals. It's when one person suggests something extreme, and instead of someone shutting it down, the others go along with it, because no one wants to be the outsider. No one wants to be the one to say, "Stop." It's why history is full of crimes committed by groups of people who, on their own, probably never would have done it. It's why teenagers, whose brains are still developing, are especially vulnerable to this kind of influence. But the truth is, no psychological theory, no childhood trauma, no excuse in the world can change what happened that night. Shandor Scherer was tortured and murdered, and the people responsible? They knew exactly what they were doing. Justice was served, but was it enough? There is no justice that can bring a murdered child back, no sentence that can undo what happened. And for Shandor Scherer's family, the pain never went away. It only changed shape. Jacqueline Vaught, Shandor's mother, had to bury her 12-year-old daughter. She had to see crime scene photos no parent should ever have to see. And then she had to sit in a courtroom, watching the people who did this to her child, knowing that one day, some of them would walk free. Jacqueline once said that for years after Shandor's murder, she lived every day feeling like her heart had been ripped out of her chest. She struggled with depression, grief, and the crushing weight of knowing how much her daughter suffered in her final moments. Her father, Steve Scherer, was never the same. He was a former Army veteran, a tough man, but Shandor's murder broke him. He turned to alcohol. He lost himself in the pain. And in 2005, 13 years after his daughter's death, Steve Scherer died of alcoholism. A slow, quiet death, caused by a grief too heavy to carry. 2 lives lost, one to murder, one to sorrow. Melinda Loveless, the girl who orchestrated Shandor's torture and death, would spend years behind bars. But in prison, something unexpected happened. She started working with rescue dogs. And that is something no prison sentence can ever undo. This wasn't a random crime. It wasn't a moment of blind rage or an accident. It was a planned, calculated act of evil. And the worst part? It was done by teenagers. 4 girls, just kids themselves, made the choice to abduct, torture, and kill a 12-year-old girl. They laughed. They joked. They bragged about it over breakfast, as if what they had done was nothing more than a game. But it wasn't a game. It was a nightmare. And it ended with an innocent child, alone in the woods, taking her last breath as her killers watched. And here's the question that lingers, even decades later. Was justice really served? 2 of them walked free after serving just a fraction of their sentences. Another, despite receiving a harsh punishment, went on to work with rescue dogs and found some form of redemption. But what about Shandor? What about the life she never got to live? The birthdays she never got to celebrate? The family she never got to have? Some say their sentences were too light, that no amount of prison time could ever be enough. Others argue that they were just kids, swept up in a storm of manipulation, peer pressure, and deep-rooted psychological trauma. So, what do you think? Should the girls have received harsher sentences? Should any of them have ever been released? Or is there such a thing as redemption after something this horrific? Let's talk about it in the comments.